Welcome back, scholars. Today we are talking about the work of our first African-American woman poet, Phillis Wheatley, the first African-American woman published in America, and the second woman whose book was published in America. Although technically, when Anne Bradstreet's book was published, she was still a British subject. So officially, Phillis Wheatley is our first published American poet. She was born somewhere on the Gambia River region of West Africa, captured and sold into slavery at the age of 8 years old around 1761. She was given the name of the ship she was brought in on, the Phillis. She was sold to the Wheatley family, who had lost their young daughter, and so Phillis became a sort of surrogate child. They taught her reading and writing, and within 2 years she'd mastered English and started learning Greek and Latin, and had begun reading the Greek classics like Ovid and Homer. Now, according to her biographer, she seemed to remember very little about her childhood. It was something of a blank slate. However, it seems likely that an 8-year-old would remember some of her time in captivity anyway. However, her poem suggests that she recalls her life prior to her prior life in Africa. Very little about it. Now, the fact she wrote poetry at such a young age suggests she was likely influenced by the tradition of African storytelling. She was brought to New England after what was called the Great Awakening, a time of religious revival and interest in Christianity. It was not uncommon to bring slaves to church, but Phillis was allowed to study and learn. Now, let me make clear, her experience of slavery was far different than many people. She was not given the experience of chattel slavery. She was afforded a lot more opportunities than most people who were brought here as slaves. One of her first poems was an elegy to the late preacher George Whitefield. This poem propelled her to fame. She started writing poetry as a teenager. She was the first black woman to publish a book in America and possibly the world. However, the book was not without some scandal. An inquisition was held before the book was published. Subject to the Inquisition, whether or not Africans were intellectually equal to white people. And people just could not believe that she had written something so complicated. But at the conclusion of the Inquisition, they were convinced that she had, in fact, written the book and had not used a ghostwriter. The book's publication gained the attention of Voltaire and others who supported the abolition of slavery. What this book did is it showed that, given the opportunities and the education, that there was very little difference between Africans and whites. That it wasn't a matter of them being intellectually inferior. It was just that they had not been exposed to the things that we had. And so they were just as intelligent, just as capable, and which made things pretty uncomfortable for the pro-slavery side. She changed people's mind about the intellectual capacity of Africans. She forced colonists to question their ideas about black people's intelligence and equality. She shook those that doubted black people should be here at all. Her influence lasted well beyond 1773 when she gained her freedom. However, many were not convinced. One of her detractors was, unfortunately, Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson wrote in Notes on the State of Virginia, "Misery is often the parent of the most affecting touches in poetry. Among the blacks is misery enough, God knows, but no poetry. Love is the peculiar ostrom of the poet. Their love is ardent, but kindles the sense only, not the imagination. Religion indeed has produced a Phillis Wheatley, but it could not produce a poet. The compositions published under her name are below the dignity of criticism." I believe the Founding Father doth protest too much. Wheatley published a book, poems on several subjects, religious and moral, and one of the first African-American women to publish a book in the United States, and the second of any race to do so. Again, the first, as I said, being Anne Bradstreet. She was also the most visible African-American woman in New England during the Revolutionary period. She was the best-known black person in the colonies. She brought into question that black people were incapable of greatness and intelligent thought. She passed away young at the age of 31 on December 15th, 1784. Unfortunately, other than the book here, most of her writings were lost. But she remains one of the most influential figures and quite a hallmark of American letters. She was our first published woman poet. There are a couple of poems assigned here, but we're going to pay special attention to on being brought from Africa to America, which reads, "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God and a Savior too. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew, and some of our sable race with scornful eye, their color is a diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes, black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train." Okay. Some people said her work was derivative, and well, for a young poet, that's not necessarily an insult. It's not even abnormal. As beginning, as poets, we all imitate the people we admire and imitate the working writers. It's the style of the time. But there is some insight. There's some beautiful imagery here. For example, "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land and taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God and a Savior too." Now, this is you get the sense that maybe Phillis Wheatley is very much a glass half full type person. Because she says, slavery is a terrible thing, but it brought me here. And I learned about the gift of salvation. I learned about Christ and God, and that there's salvation in faith and baptism, that kind of thing. He goes, "Once our redemption neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye." He's addressing prejudice here. Sable being dark, black. "Their color is a diabolic eye, or diabolic dye," it says. And this is in quotation marks. She's quoting the insult here. Right? Some have referred to it as the mark of Cain. There's really no evidence of that, but that's what a lot of people say. "Remember, Christians, Negroes, black as Cain." Of course, there it is. The tradition that when God punished Cain by putting his mark on him, he turned him black. "May be refined and join the angelic train." Okay. Look, we're all subject to salvation. The gift of salvation is free to all of us, black or white. And remember that, Christians. So there's a note of reprimand here, a note of warning, of instruction. Remember, we are all subject to God's grace here. So that is Phillis Wheatley, quite a fascinating figure in American letters, and one that probably doesn't get as much traction outside of American literature courses. Styles of poetry change, being what they are these days. Quite different from when she was writing, but still a great poet and a great figure. All right, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.